Hello everyone, Shirley here. The Department of Defense has over $1 trillion in discretionary funding in their FY26 budget approved by Congress on January 26. This money needs to be spent by September 30th. The 2026 NDAA was signed into law on December 18th of 2025. Procurement policies, practices, programs, and opportunities for small and non-traditional government contractors have expanded considerably. My name is Shirley Collier. I'm a serial entrepreneur and founder and CEO of Scale to Market, whose mission is to help small GovCons think, plan, and execute the business strategies that will allow their companies to grow in the very complex and rapidly changing government marketplace. I've been talking about new contracting office authorities, direct award thresholds, and programs that encourage innovation at the Department of Defense in other episodes and in my Substack. One thing is very clear. You must be CMMC certified to win a DoD contract. Because many small and non-traditional businesses are not certified, I have been in search of practical, quick, affordable ways for these businesses to meet these requirements so they can qualify to compete for contracts this year. My special guest today to help me explore this important topic is Chris May, Vice President of Security and Growth at Advantage Tech. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, thanks, Shirley. I appreciate the invitation. This is such an important topic right now because a lot of companies want to work with the Department of Defense but aren't always sure what the security expectations actually look like. I'm really glad to be here to help break down some of that in a practical way.
Well, I'm glad that you're here as well, and I look forward to our discussion. Please introduce yourself to the audience.
Absolutely. So my name is Chris May. I'm the Vice President of Security and Growth at Advantage Tech. Before getting into cybersecurity, I actually started my career in the U.S. Navy as a nuclear engineer working on nuclear propulsion systems. And I'll be honest, that environment really shaped, I think about risk, operational discipline, and accountability. Today, though, my work really focuses on helping companies, especially federal contractors and organizations that want to become federal contractors, build cybersecurity and compliance programs that actually support their business. We spend a lot of time helping organizations understand and shape federal security frameworks and then how to implement them in a practical way so they can actually pursue government opportunities confidently.
Thank you, Chris. I understand that the DoD is now requiring contractors and their subs to be CMMC level 1 through 3 certified. Can we begin our discussion by clarifying what that means?
Absolutely. So at its core, the CMMC is about making sure companies in the defense supply chain are following a recognized cybersecurity framework to protect sensitive information. For most contractors, the framework behind CMMC Level 2 is based on NIST Special Publication 800-71. This outlines the security controls required to protect Controlled Unclassified Information, or CUI. I think everybody now has heard about CUI at this point. So Level 1 is a simpler starting point for CMMC compliance. It focuses on a smaller set of foundational security practices, and it's something that companies can actually even self-attest to now. So the reason that I've always encouraged companies to start there is because it creates a foundation. It gets governance and documentation and basic security controls in place. Now, once that foundation exists, it becomes much easier for us to move toward Level 2. So if the company needs to handle CUI later, we can actually get them there much smoother. And the good news is that starting with Level 1, it doesn't require a huge investment anymore. It simply shows that your organization has begun aligning with recognized security practices and aligning with policies of the Department of Defense.
We'll talk more about Level 1 in a minute, but Chris, I've heard some small businesses say that they're not pursuing cleared work, so they don't really need to be CMMC certified. Can you explain the difference between classified work and CMMC certification?
100%, and that's a question I get every day, so I appreciate you asking that. CMMC certification is proving that you meet the NIST model that we just spoke about. That doesn't mean you have classified information. CUI is what they're looking for. If you have CUI, that's when they ask you to meet CMMC. CUI is actually controlled unclassified information. So CMMC doesn't specifically cover classified information. That controlled unclassified can be things, bid documents. It can be plans and drawings, construction drawings for skiffs and things like that. So we have construction contractors that actually fall under CMMC. And again, they aren't seeing classified information, but the information they are seeing is somewhat controlled, and the government feels as if it needs to be controlled in a secure manner.
Thank you for that clarification. Let's talk about some additional misunderstandings. Small GovCons typically underestimate risk associated with DoD contracting. The DoD's mission is serious, and it involves understanding security on multiple levels and managing those risks. To be successful, small contractors must exhibit that they too are serious, that they protect information, and are reliable partners. From your perspective, explain the type of risk small GovCons must understand and mitigate.
That's a great question, and something I was speaking about on stage actually yesterday. So one of the biggest misunderstandings I see is companies focusing entirely on winning contracts without preparing their environment to support the operational requirements behind those contracts. When you work with the Department of Defense, security is directly tied to trust, okay? So if a company cannot protect the sensitive information, that creates risk not just for the government, but also for primes and other partners in that supply chain. So what CMMC is really doing is setting expectations for how companies manage information, manage their systems, and manage risk, right? While it can seem really complicated in the beginning, the controls themselves are actually really common sense practices that are going to make the business safer overall. That's one of the reasons I really support NIST, because it does make you safer. So implementing these practices doesn't just help you pursue the government contract. It actually significantly strengthens the security of the company itself, which is really where we want to be in the current threat landscape.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you made that point. If small companies can view CMMC certification as an investment in the viability and protection of their company, not just meeting compliance guidelines, it changes everyone's attitude about the required effort. So in that regard, Chris, I advise my clients on how to think, plan, speak, and act strategically and to execute tactically. How can GovCons think differently about CMMC beyond just getting certified?
That's a wonderful question and something I've been talking about a lot this year already. The companies that succeed with CMMC stop thinking about it as a certification and start thinking about it as a management framework. This has to be owned by the CEO, the president, the top-level leadership of the company. When a company implements even the foundational principles behind the framework, you gain much better visibility in your system, stronger governance over information, and you get a much clearer accountability around security practices. So if you just start with CMMC Level 1, that self-attestation we talked about, it's a really practical first step, and it demonstrates that the organization and the leadership of the organization has begun aligning with recognized security practices. And then we can create that foundation that we talked about earlier that we can build on later.
I couldn't agree more. As the Department of Defense is increasingly emphasizing innovation, they also want to do business with companies that are well run. So, Chris, let's say that I'm a small, innovative company that has not done business with the Department of Defense, but I see opportunities to demonstrate some of our capabilities. What should I do to prepare for a potential contract? And most importantly, what mistakes should I avoid?
I love that you're educating your listenership on this up front, because the biggest mistake companies make is waiting until an opportunity appears before they even start prepping, right? So security maturity takes time. It involves policy, governance, operational process, leadership involvement, definitely not just technology. So that common mistake is assuming that cybersecurity is just purely an IT issue. In reality, how the company governs the security and handles that sensitive information is just as important or more important as the tools being used. You can't control what you don't govern well. And the good news, though, is that if you start with that focused effort, right, and build the foundational practices first, then you can very steadily increase that maturity without overwhelming the organization or without overwhelming budgets.
And none of us want to be overwhelmed. So I agree 100%. Too often, I see companies respond to RFPs first. then start working on CMMC certification, and it places a lot of pressure on their businesses. We need to take a break. I'm talking to Chris May, Vice President of Security and Growth at Advantage Tech. When we come back, we'll talk about balancing risk and opportunity. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Shirley Collier, President and founder of Scale to Market, is your host for this Growth Masters Federal presentation. Scale to Market helps businesses think, plan, collaborate, and build market value by developing and executing customized data-driven business development playbooks, building efficient information systems, and creating high-performing BD teams. Utilizing the proprietary Davy Business Development Growth Framework, Scale to Market partners with business owners and executives to increase their company's value by achieving profitable and sustainable growth in the federal marketplace. Email Shirley at scollier@scaletomarket.com to learn more about the Davy Growth Framework and how it can be instrumental in helping grow your federal contracting business. Back now to Shirley's conversation with Chris May, Vice President of Security and Growth at Advantage Tech, as they discuss why and how to prepare your company for DoD contracts.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about mistakes that small GovCons make. Chris, you and I have spoken about how companies can minimize risk and maximize opportunity at the same time. How should companies balance these two factors?
That's such a good question and a hard one to understand. But one of the most practical ways companies can balance that risk and opportunity is just by starting with that CMMC Level 1 self-attestation that we talked about earlier, right? So Level 1 aligns with the foundational security principles of NIST, like we discussed, and it establishes basic protections across the company. So just doing this alone not only helps you in the contracting, but it significantly improves your security posture. Also, it sends a very important signal to partners and contracting officers, especially companies like us. When you have an SPRS score and a documented system security plan in place, it shows me that you've actually taken the time to align with the framework, and it shows me you've actually thought about it a little bit. That makes it so much easier for primes and agencies to see that you've taken it seriously and that you're ready to operate within the defense ecosystem.
I agree that you want to be talking to people ahead of time and discussing opportunities, and they want to know that you're going to be a reliable partner down the road. They don't want to wait until down the road to discover that. So explain the SPRS score and the system security plan.
So a lot of people don't understand what these are. So there's a couple different systems that you have to log into as a government contractor. So SPRS score is the SPRS is the Supplier Performance Risk System. So they score you on that. So one of the first things you want to do is you have to get into a system where you can place the scores in your system security plan so the DoD can see them. Now, where do we start with this before we get your score? We start with your system security plan. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a plan of the security of your systems. We lay that out and make sure that we've covered all 17 of the basic NIST principles. So we use those NIST principles, and if we say we've covered all these things they say, then we know our system security plan is effectively covering the entire environment. Once we have that system security plan, we go through a scoring matrix there in the Supplier Performance Risk System score. That SPRS score shows us where you are. You can have up to 110 on the score. Most people never get 110 in the very beginning, and that's not anything to worry about. Because if you don't have 110, we write a form called a POA&M, and that helps show you where the gaps are and a plan to fix the gaps. So if you have a system security plan, a POA&M, and a SPRS score, now we can go into PIEE together. We can put those scores and those plans in, and then you can go through and we can help you self-attest to Level 1, and it's literally, that's as complicated as Level 1 gets. So we build a technology plan, we put the foundational policy and procedure in place, and we make sure everything's executed, and then we upload the system security plan and the SPRS scores to the federal government.
Thank you, Chris. That's very clear. So now let's talk about immediate actions that a company can take. How do you advise the CEOs who are listening?
I'm so glad you mentioned the CEOs, and you probably heard me call that out earlier. This is an initiative that must be driven by top-level leadership. In our company, this is owned by our president, CEO, and driven by him and myself, who is the security officer and the vice president. The first steps for most organizations, once you have that leadership buy-in, is to simply conduct a gap analysis. This gap analysis allows a company to understand where it currently stands, right, compared to the framework. So we're going to use the framework to do the gap analysis. Once you have that visibility, it becomes much easier to design a roadmap towards compliance, right? This is not something we want to guess about. We want to roadmap it out. If I say things 3 times, it's because of how important they are. This has to be driven from the leadership level. The CEO and the executive team need to own the initiative because a large portion of the work actually involves governance, policy, and operational practice. That's not stuff that's laid out by the IT team, right? The leadership needs to design governance, policy, and practices. And then the technology actually comes later because first we define how the organization intends to operate securely, then we implement the system that supports those policies.
Chris, we don't normally talk about products on our show, but you have developed a tool that I think is incredibly helpful and cost-effective for small contractors. Can you explain a little about this to the audience?
Absolutely. So I've been doing this a long time, as you know. I originally started out as a naval nuclear engineer. So I've been working in the government space a lot. And what we discovered working with smaller contractors is that most of them don't struggle because they lack the technology. They really struggle because they don't have a clear structure for implementing the framework at all. So I developed a process years ago that helps companies understand where they are today, identify the gaps that actually matter most for federal work, and then prioritize improvements in a practical order. So what that looks like is we see a lot of people now that try to go into CMMC and they don't even know where to start, or they'll just jump into level 2 and they're not sure what to do. What we've been telling people for years is, first of all, if you're doing anything that may touch supply chain for the DoD, you need to go ahead and get level 1. It's not a huge ask and it's not a huge needle to move. So what we've done in that space is to be able to come in and say, look, we're going to do a gap analysis. We're going to help you write your system security plan. We're going to help you get your SPRS score, and we're going to show you how to get all that in the system, and then we're going to help you attest to level 1. Now, that right there shows that you have a CMMC contractor number. That shows that you've taken the steps. Surely that package is typically only about $5,000 to $7,500, and we see other companies telling people they're going to start at $50,000.
Yes.
We also won't just jump into level 2. Right, we want to stay at level 1 because we build that foundational framework, and we also try to keep it as inexpensive as possible to bring the barrier to entry down. Because what we know as a federal contractor, if you get that CMMC level 1, it's easy for you then to talk to the contracting officers. A lot of them now are starting to ask for the SPRS score, right? Well, if you don't have it, they're not saying you need to be CMMC level 1, but if you haven't even put a score in that they can't see, then it makes you less attractive. So basically what that package looks like is to come in, interview leadership, interview the techs, and then find out where you stand, build that simple plan, and then, like I said in the beginning, once we build that system security plan and the risk score, you've moved 30% of the needle already towards level 2. But again, we always want to start to get people level 1, get it self-attested, and then move from there. Does that make sense of kind of what our plan looks like?
Yes, and I love that. One of the biggest complaints that I hear from small government contractors, of course, is the expense. You know, they understand that it's important, that cybersecurity is important and CMMC certification is important, but they're just overwhelmed by the cost of the program. So I'm so glad that you have a way for small contractors to get started inexpensively.
I like to tell a quick story on CMMC level 1. So we have a defense contractor that's a construction company that puts glass and stuff in skiffs, in federal skiffs. So you think a contractor has to have CMMC. They were quoted $25,000 to get to level 1. The person they contracted with originally drugged their feet for about 4 months. We were able to come in at a price of $5,000 and have them CMMC level 1 attested in 3 weeks. Because we don't overcomplicate it and we're not trying to oversell you, right? That's the difference, is the work itself is mostly policy and procedure work, but people make it more technical and then they add on layers of costs that really don't need to exist until you get to level 2. And again, I want to focus on that. Don't let somebody tell you, hey, let's just go to level 2 and we'll get level 1 in the process. Let's start with level 1, focus on that so we build a solid foundation for the house, and then we start building level 2 on it, the foundation won't crumble.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does, and I'd imagine that your clients also learn throughout that process for level 1.
Shirley, this is why you and I get along. Because you understand that I'm a teacher, right?
Yeah.
The biggest thing I love is education, and we have to educate the leadership in this process. You keep hearing me go back to the CEOs, right? A huge part of this process was educating our own CEO. Now, he's my best friend. He's our president, and he's a brilliant server architect and virtual machine engineer. He's incredibly smart. He doesn't live in the world of security. So what did I do when we started down this path? I sat down with Richie, and I educated him. I said, Richie, this is where we need to go. This is what we need to do, and you have to own this. You're the CEO. That alone changes the mindset of the company, because now you've got the leadership operating in a secure mind frame, right? In a secure framework.
Yeah.
And we know that leadership drives the mission, right? And so that education is something we're big on. We could honestly jump into those systems and put the score in for them and put the system security plan in for them. We don't do that. I make them log in with their stuff, and I walk them through it on the screen so they know what we did, and they learn the systems, and they can manage them moving forward without being attached to us if they prefer to move on.
Yeah. And these practices that you're putting into place can help companies protect themselves from everyday threats like business email compromise, malware, and ransomware, right?
Oh, absolutely. If there's one takeaway here that I would leave with listeners, and especially with leaders, is that these frameworks aren't being put in place just to create bureaucracy. I know it feels that way sometimes, but that is not the case here. The practices behind things like NIST 800-171 and then CMMC actually make organizations significantly safer from the type of threats that we see every day, as you mentioned. One of the best places companies can start is simply by what we just said, educating their employees. This is something we do for free for any company. We'll come in and do a basic security training showing them how they're the last line of defense, because security awareness training alone can dramatically reduce the risk. It's something that we provide regularly at no cost like that just because we see it move the needle so far. So, once companies start down this path, what they usually realize is the process is much more manageable than it appeared, but they're going to see instant improvements in the strength of the overall business and the strength of the security posture.
So, in summary, the Department of Defense has over $1 trillion in discretionary spending budgeted for FY26. The NDAA detailed many procurement regulatory changes and programs to entice small and non-traditional contractors to do business with the Department of Defense. However, to qualify for those contracts, CMMC certification is required. This has been seen as a barrier by many small and non-traditional contractors due to the perceived cost and complexity of becoming compliant. But seeing the CMMC certification process as an opportunity to protect your company, qualify for significant contracting opportunities, and to become compliant is the key to success. There are simple but mature processes and tools, as Chris explained, that help small and non-traditional defense contractors prepare for and win contracts with the Department of Defense. Chris, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with all of us today.
Well, thank you, Shirley. I appreciate the conversation. This has been great.
Well, it's been my pleasure to have this very important conversation with you. Folks, if you'd like to get in touch with Chris, he can be reached at cmay@advantage.tech. Or you can reach out to us here at Scale to Market, and we'll make sure you're connected. This is Shirley Collier, President of Scale to Market, host of the Growth Masters Federal Podcast and the Small Businesses Equal Federal Innovation Substack, signing off for now. As we close, I want to thank you for joining us today and encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn and visit our website, that's scaletomarket.com with the number 2 in the middle, where you will find a link to our webcast on the Scale to Market YouTube channel, along with our Growth Masters Federal podcast, white papers, my blog, and other links and resources. While there, please leave us a comment or suggestion so we can stay focused on what's important to you. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.